Well, welcome back and many thanks for staying with us on the Number One Breakfast Show as Parliament debates the parish model. There seems to be growing consensus that is our answer to the economic transformation. And to speak to us about this and more, I have Keith Chisame. He is a research fellow at the Advocates Coalition for Development and the Environment, and he joins me right now. A very good morning, Keith. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
All right. There was a high-level national dialogue last week that took center stage. I want to know what were the conclusions, recommendations, if you will.
Thank you. We had, first I worked with ACCORD, Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment, and together with the Ministry of Finance and CSBAG, we had a dialogue that was looking at how we can reignite growth and development of this economy, because I think if anyone has looked at the latest growth numbers from Uganda Bureau of Statistics, there is a lot of stagnation in key sectors and some negative growth in some of the key sectors, and so we need to have conversations around how we
and of course conversations were had last week in this light, because 3.3 million people slipped into poverty. That is during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic since March of last year. So what were some of the recommendations that were aired out during this dialogue that would go a long way in alleviating such debacles?
So one of the things that of course came out very clearly excuse me, is the prioritization of our coming budget to focus on elements of this economy that are key to alleviating poverty. One of those things is bringing credit to SMEs, which are employing majority of the Ugandans that are in gainful employment, and many of these are still suffering the brunt of COVID-19. But at the same time, these are guys that cannot access credit in the commercial banks, and
they can't even access the stimulus fund.
Yeah, in UDB, and so one of the things that was talked about was leveraging the financing that we have in the likes of UDB to bring money down to where the people are, and that's where the conversation of the parish model came up. It's a strategy that government is using to take money down to the parish level, which is the lowest, one of the lowest levels of administration that we have in the country. It's a very good model. If well implemented. It
is a very, very good model. In the beginning, they had chosen to match money from the Youth Livelihood Fund, from the Uganda Women Entrepreneurship Program, funds that have since been withdrawn. Do you think this shall have a detrimental effect on the implementation of the parish model from 490 billion all the way to 250 billion? 255.
Obviously, finances are crucial. So without enough finances, that means that the model has to be phased in its implementation. So right now, the focus is on mindset change and preparations, setting up parish development committees, and having parish chiefs in places where they haven't had any. So putting in place the necessary administrative structures for this to be able to get going in the subsequent financial years. Of course,
you know, Kisame, I don't want us to lose the viewer who is watching Morning at NTV. How will the parish model resuscitate our economy?
The idea is to get money available to communities, circles, village saving, credit facilities, to be able to use this as a revolving fund.
I see.
For people to be able to access credit to commercialize agriculture. For this concept of agro-industrialization to be realized at the grassroots, because one of the key things that you need for agro-industrialization is organized production. And in the absence of circles, in the absence of cooperatives, you cannot have organized production. So those are some of the initiatives that are intended to be had in this parish development model, to have initiatives of that nature consolidated at the parish, so that people are able to have organized production. And what do I mean by organized production? It is simply you having a direct connection to markets, you producing for markets, rather than just putting things in the hope that you'll be able to sell when the harvest time comes. So this is intended to consolidate all the development initiatives at the parish level, which is why the initial funding mechanism was to consolidate the MIOGAs, the livelihood funds, and all these things at that level, which has since been rebuffed by these respective entities that are running these funds, because I think many of them feel when they go down this direction, the intended objectives of those initial initiatives might be lost. So that's where financing for this becomes crucial, and that's why it is being phased in its implementation. That it comes, the first phase of about 200 to 250 billion is to make sure administrative structures are in place.
Indeed.
And then subsequently the funds can be in place to roll it out.
You do have legislators, Mr. Chisame, on the budget committee who are adamant to allow this to happen. They say, well, we have great production in this country. You have Ugandans who are producing a lot of maize. You have Ugandans who are producing a lot of milk. They're producing a lot of we are still producing a lot, but then they say we do not have a market where to sell most of our produce. The Kenyan market for the maize farmers. You do have the South Sudan market is largely closed. We are still just opening up DRC. Rwanda, it is closed. So they say instead of focusing on the production, we should focus on creation of markets and value addition for our products. Could this be the reason we should go for this?
Yeah, those are two critical aspects of this. Some of the key pillars, the 7 pillars of this, involve value addition and the creation of markets. And again, not only the legislators, but Ugandans all over have reason to be concerned, because we've had similar initiatives in the past that have not delivered. So it is important that this is implemented the right way. And what do we mean by the right way? I think it is very essential that this is not implemented outside the decentralization structures, because then you would have frustrated some of the efforts that are already in place, the structures that are already in place to be able to deliver services of this nature. So while it is a very good model, I don't think this needs to be implemented out of the decentralization structures. If anything, at parish level, there are no votes. So you can't send government money there. That's why they have to create circles and all these other village saving credit facilities to be able to receive money directly. But the argument we've been making in the research world and the policy advocacy world is that this can be used to strengthen sub-county structures, which in many instances have been bypassed by initiatives of this nature. So that you have accountability structures in place that are able to deliver this right down to the parish level, because the sub-county chiefs will be in place to be able to monitor and provide accountability to the chief administrative officer, who is the overall in charge of the model in the district.
Well, you have individuals who say the parish model would have been so effective, and maybe a ministry, let's say the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. But what do you make of that, instead of the local government ministry, which is riddled with a lot of corruption? That's what they contend. But according to your assessment, what have you found out? Of
course, the whole point of this parish model is to get resources away from the center down to where they ought to be. Let me give you an example of a project that is run through a ministry. The administrative component alone takes maybe a quarter of the money. For people to deliver, to go and monitor what is happening on the ground. They have to fuel cars, you have to give staff per diems, there's a lot of administrative costs that you would otherwise avoid if the money is closer to where it is intended.
So the viewer who is watching right now is asking, well, we've continued to borrow to fund these projects. So Uganda's public debt stock has now skyrocketed to over 65 trillion Uganda shillings. Is Uganda's debt sustainable? Because we are going to continue borrowing. We need to service the East Africa crude oil pipeline. We need to service many of these other infrastructure projects that are going to come into the oil and gas sector. So meaning more borrowing is going to be taking center stage. So the question is Uganda's debt sustainable?
Allow me start by defining what sustainability is. In economics, debt sustainability simply refers to your ability to pay your debts. So essentially, when we say is Uganda's debt sustainable, the question we're asking is, can Uganda pay off its debt? And the answer is yes, the debt remains sustainable. The challenge is that the more we continue to borrow, there is a risk of falling into a debt trap. And what a debt trap is that you find yourself in a place where you have to keep borrowing to sustain services and deliver on certain aspects, even in some instances to pay off some of the debt that has matured and you don't have revenue for it. Some of the concerns that we should have as a country is that right now servicing of debt and the interests accrued thereof is taking up almost half of the revenue we are collecting, and that is a challenge because that means you're left with very little money to deliver on the services of your people and you find yourself having to borrow. The question is not whether we need to borrow, because countries all over the world borrow. The question is at what cost and what are we trading off? Because when we borrow at high costs or non-concessional terms, as they call it in economics, it's a challenge.
It looks like 20% of this budget is going to be servicing a loan or a debt.
And that is the challenge that we are talking about. As more and more of your resources are being taken up to service debt and loans and interests thereof, it's a challenge. So
meaning out of the 45 trillion shillings national budget, we might be using only 26 trillion and the rest is going to servicing of the debt.
Absolutely. So not only debt, but other statutory expenditure. But the point that needs to be made here is that when COVID-19 came and put a spanner in many of the revenue mobilization works that we have, as a country, what we ought to have done is to rein in the expenditure. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened because we've continued to have expansive budgets and fiscal policies.
MPs have refused to cut down on their foreign travel. Very, very callous.
At a time when you would say maybe travel is not a priority for the economy currently. So we need to rein in the expenditure so that we don't find ourselves in a trap where we have to keep borrowing.
Besides running in the expenditure, you have individuals who are contending that we should have helped SMEs resuscitate themselves, meaning when they were hit by COVID-19, they went into slumber. They were not remitting any of the money through taxes to the government. By helping them resuscitate themselves, they would be actually remitting more money to the national coffers, meaning we wouldn't have to borrow more money. We would depend on the 90% who are the SMEs. Don't you think that it was a mistake not to help them get resuscitated during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Of course, that presupposes that SMEs are actually taxpayers.
Indeed,
so we need to start there. And many of them, we could say, are in the informal sector and in one way or another are not paying the taxes they ought to pay. But that's a discussion for another day. Formalizing this is very important.
Indeed.
But resuscitating them is important for so many reasons. One, they employ majority of Ugandans.
Indeed.
Two, there is a potential of expanding the tax base within the SMEs.
Indeed.
And as a result, their contribution to the economy would also improve if they are resuscitated. The stimulus package we put in place did not specifically target them. It's very hard for someone who is operating as an SME to access credit from the UDBs of this world because of the characteristics of their business. So we need to work on things like the lending rates in commercial banks, because that's where SMEs are able to go in, they have an account, and they can easily access credit. So for being able, government needs to be able to help reduce the risk by giving guarantees to these commercial banks, so that they can be able to lend to the small and medium enterprises, because they are risky to lend to. The risk of defaulting is very high because they can close any day due to the circumstances in the economy. So it's very important to avail credit for them. And how one of the sure ways we can do that is working with commercial banks that have this money, this liquidity available to lend to the SMEs by giving them guarantees against defaults and other strategies that can help reduce on the risk of lending to the private sector.
Now, before I let you go, if SMEs are not helped, do you envisage a situation whereby we slip more into poverty, a situation whereby more businesses close up, situations whereby more Ugandans are grappling and can't make ends meet, if we do not resuscitate SMEs and so forth?
Yes, the risk is very high that many of those things are likely to happen, because if these SMEs that are employing many of the Ugandans in gainful employment or in paid employment are closing shop, it means that those people that were employed today are not there. That means that their source of income has been destabilized. The risk of falling into poverty consequently goes high. And these are not abstract things. I just want you to, and the viewers, to think through the kiosk that was on their way home, if it is still operating. The person who was selling drinks and refreshments along their way home, if they are still operating, because these are realities that we are seeing every day, and these are people
we take for granted.
Yes, and these are people that contribute in terms of employment significantly.
Keith Chisame is a research fellow at the Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment. Many thanks for coming through on Morning at NTV.
Pleasure.
And of course, the micro, small and medium-sized enterprises are the backbone of this economy. They make up 90% of the service sector, and we need to do more to resuscitate this sector because it makes up 90% of this economy. My name is Romeo Busiku. Well,